So tonight, this is our last call for the Coor Show. And then we open next week. On Monday is a preview, and Tuesday is our opening night. And if you've been paying attention to the news at all, you've probably seen that the mask mandate has been extended. The Omicron variant is really just blazing a trail. So we're going to have people show their vax cards to get into the Coor Show. And hopefully, if the majority of people are vaccinated, then we don't have to all wear masks. We're going to have masks available. And we have some really fancy ones with the Coor Show logo printed on them. So yeah, hopefully keepsakes in a few months if we can beat this thing. So anyway, without further ado, Joseph McGurl is on the call, Ulrich Gleiter and Silas Thompson on the call. Before we started and this conversation, Joe and Uli and I and Silas, we were talking about the myth of the West. And it came up because Ulrich is German, and I have no idea even where in the world he is right at the moment, but he is often in Spain, Norway, Russia, the Greek islands. Where are you right now, Uli?
St. Petersburg.
So yeah,
Russia.
In Russia. So.
I haven't been here much with all this pandemic, so it's like for the 2 years, like the first month or something that I'm here again. And actually I pulled up some paintings that I painted just like 3 years ago in the back, because the ones in the show, they're just all painted, well, during the pandemic when I hadn't been here.
Wow.
Yeah.
So Ulrich is the farthest eastern artist that we have in the Western show. Farther east than Joe McGurl, who's in Massachusetts, and Silas in Idaho with the attack cat. Yeah, that is so perfect. So you know what? Usually I kind of jump right in and I single out an artist, but just because of where we are, we're so spread out. I would love to talk about what is Western art, and because I think it's kind of an interesting conversation, especially when people are coming in from outside the West, and there is really this big myth of the West. And we've had artists like Bierstadt and Moran and Charlie Russell and Remington, all painting a West. Not Moran was really kind of painting what was here, but the others kind of painting a mythic vision of the West, a grand vision of the West, or a West that was gone by the time they got here. And so I would love to pitch this out to the three of you. When you're creating work for the Coor Show or a place, a venue in the Western United States, what are you thinking about with the work? Joe, what are your thoughts about that?
Well, for me, the Western landscape is what really intrigues me, not so much the story of the West, but I do like putting little anecdotal narrative features in my paintings, a cowboy and a horse, but it's really about the landscape. And the thing I love about the Western landscape is the sense of space, just this vast space, because I grew up in Quincy, which is a city just south of Boston. It was very claustrophobic. We all had small yards, and you just didn't get that huge sense of space unless you went out on the water, which is, I think, what attracted me to painting, shoreline and islands and seascapes. But the same attraction I find in the West, where I go out there and I just want to roam forever. And I really can't paint with authenticity, Indians and blankets and those popular Western subjects as the subject for the painting, because I don't really know it. I haven't lived the life. It would be hard for me to place an Indian, Native American in a painting, because I just don't know enough about the subject matter and about how they live and such, and how they would like to be portrayed and how to portray them honestly. But I can put small little anecdotal narrative contents in the paintings, which is really fun because in the East, we really can't do that. There isn't that sort of story. The East, we had, starving pilgrims and burning witches. And in the
Yeah.
West, you've got cowboys and Indians and
Yeah.
buffalo and, the open range with cows and such, which I really enjoyed painting. It's also nice being able to put these little features and little points of interest in the painting. I'll often add some cows or horses or something such as that to some of my Western landscapes.
Which is still very much a part of the landscape, although as Barbara Van Cleve will let us all know, their cows are being herded with ATVs and motorcycles, much to her displeasure. But yeah, there's
yes, you're right. I was out painting this ranch and I hear this ATV coming up behind me, and it's the cowboy in the ranch. He said he just came over to check out what I was doing.
Oh my
I said,
God.
"Where's the horse?"
Yeah, right. You almost made a cameo. I'm glad. I'd love for you two, Ulrich and Silas, to comment on this as well. But I'm very grateful for you to say that, Joe, about not knowing the Native American lifestyle, indigenous lifestyle, and not putting it in there. Curatorially, this is a decision that I made many, many years ago, is that to be respectful of other cultures, and if it's not your culture, then and we do have Native American artists in the show, and their work is not Indians and teepees. It's definitely very vibrant and reacting to and talking about things that are issues with them, or how they're thinking about life, and contemporary art pieces that are really adding in their own past and their own imagery and subject matter, things like that. So I appreciate you saying that, because I do really want the work to be authentic experiences for each person, which, I think is interesting when you're in Massachusetts, Uli, you're in St. Petersburg right now, and and Silas jump in too to the conversation, but where does that authenticity come from then?
Well, for me, it comes from the plein air painting that I do out west. I take a couple of trips out west a year, and I'll spend quite a bit of time painting the landscape. And the wonderful thing about plein air painting is you really have to dissect the landscape visually and then put it back together on your canvas. So once you've completed a painting and spent a few hours really examining this subject, you know it really well. And oftentimes I'll return to the same subject day after day, rather than jumping around from spot to spot. And that way I know that one subject really well and intimately. And I can use that for the basis for studio paintings. Oftentimes I'll use the same sketch and do several different versions of it, different angles, making up the composition, but using the geography and the flora and the fauna and such for the authenticity part of the painting.
Ulrich, what about you? What about, because you've come out here to paint a number of times, but you haven't been west in almost 2 years though.
The image of the West, probably it's a bit related to, when we first met. It was at those plein air shows back already like 10 years ago. And
in Estes Park.
Right. And how did I get to know the West? It was just this extremely beautiful and majestic and impressive landscape, those wide open spaces, and which I just completely fell in love with. And probably since these trips, sort of like I was just trying to, when I was always painting for the course show, I was just, trying to get images that sort of like related to those landscapes that I have been seeing out in Colorado, which you could also, of course, like find over here in Europe, and sort of try to get my best paintings together during those, chances that you're having, like winter or these kind of seasons.
Yeah.
And of course, I can only agree with Joseph that it would be very hard for me to paint, Indians, these kinds of subjects, because it would be totally foreign for me. But it just, for me, it is more like, to capture this, like the seasons like of winter, and just this roughness and all this snow, and try to get a very good painting out of it. And yeah, so this is what I'm always looking when I'm choosing paintings for the show.
Yeah.
So it was just this just this very strong feeling for nature, which is sort of like, for me, related with this is what I got from the West, from those travels over here.
Yeah.
Right.
And Silas, you are from Idaho. And so, for those of us in Colorado, you're technically the Northwest. So yeah, but no, I mean, really kind of talk about that, because you grew up in this area, and you grew up undoubtedly knowing the myths of the West, and surrounded by reservation lands in Idaho. There's quite a bit.
Yeah. So you mentioned Thomas Moran earlier, and so where the house I grew up in was about a 10-minute drive from, there's a famous Thomas Moran painting of the Shoshone Falls, and it's a massive painting, and I don't know if you've ever seen it in person, but it's something that is just so overwhelming whenever you see it, and you consider, this artist that came west with this big team of donkeys and horses and a whole crew of people, and I grew up, that waterfall I would go to, at least 3 or 4 times a month. I'd go there with my friends. I'd go there in search of adventure on a Saturday. Some of that is still, I think, ingrained. What makes the West so true is the myth. It's that search for adventure. It's that excitement, all mixed with the fact that it's a 512-foot drop. And then over here it's a mountain that's 12,000 feet tall. And so there is something, everywhere on earth is so bizarre and different, but there is something about the West that, for those that I think came west, those that lived out here, the natives, and those that live here now or visit, that there is just a grandness that it's hard to find something that compares to it. And I think, the Snake River, as it sort of cuts across all of southern Idaho, and it's just this, in my mind, it's this picture of a land, a birthmark, and how the Native Americans settled all kind of on the north side of it, the south side of it, and everywhere from where it comes out of the ground near Yellowstone to where it floods out into the ocean, and the same with the settlers that came west later on. There is this sense of adventure in the myth that is the thing that everyone is searching for. And I think that's what makes it so true.
Yeah, what I think that is I think you're just really kind of hitting the nail on the head with that there is this myth, and then for each artist, where do you find your truth? And I think that is something about having a show that is with living artists, and the work is all fresh, it's all new. And so to be able to respond to, and then of course to take in what's happening today in society, and certainly what we started out talking about is the coronavirus, COVID. And so there are all these things that, even though we're all in our little studios working away, they still kind of figure into your life and what's coming out of the studio, I would have to think. Hey, I'm going to shine a spotlight on Joe McGurl. Well, let's take a look at, I want to take a look at everybody's work individually and talk about what you're going to have at the show. And I'd love to tell everybody also who is listening in to please use the chat if you have questions. I'll read them out loud to our artists and have them respond to those. So Joe, it's so good to see you. I'm glad you're coming out for the show. It's been kind of touch and go with a lot of artists, but you're coming out, yeah?
Yeah, I'm double vaxxed and boosted and wear the mask, so.
Yeah, good, right?
My distance, and hopefully things will be good.
Yeah, throw a few Hail Marys in there and you're covered. Yeah. Hey, so Joe, when we were talking about authenticity, and you are somebody who refuses to use photographs, you don't believe in using photography in your work, and you have developed quite a system that you actually teach other artists to when you're working from life, which is a very important aspect of what you do. And wonder if you would talk a little bit about that philosophy of working from life. I mean, talk about being authentic. There it is, right?
Sure. Well, I think it started when I was in college, and I was in the studio. I was painting a picture, a seascape from a photograph. And when I finished it, I didn't enjoy it. It wasn't fun. It wasn't adventurous. It was just basically copying one image to another image. And it just sort of felt empty. And then I had this teacher that told me to go outdoors and paint. And I did that. And the first time I really did serious plein air painting, I was probably 19. And I absolutely loved it right away. I felt this real connection to the landscape. And gradually, the landscape sort of predominated in my art. I remember there was a period when I was doing portraits and still lifes and figures and landscapes and such. And then I realized that I just loved the landscape so much. I didn't want to waste my time doing things that I wasn't totally enthralled with.
Yeah.
And by painting from life, I make that deep connection with the landscape, not just sort of physically, I know what it looks like and I can recreate it from memory, but you get this spiritual, or at least I do get this spiritual feedback when I'm out painting in the landscape. It's something similar to what the Transcendentalists, who were a 19th century group of philosophers, headed by Emerson and Thoreau and Margaret Fuller, somewhat similar to what they felt, that there was a spirituality in the landscape, and that by sort of immersing yourself in the landscape, you could experience that spirituality. And if I were painting from a photograph doesn't have any spirituality. It's just a flat image with colors on it. Yeah. So I think that's a large part of why I don't enjoy painting from photographs. And I would rather, and the way I work is I'll go out into nature. I've got thousands of plein air sketches I've painted over the years. But now a lot of my paintings are imaginary, and they're sort of based on empirical observation, what things that I observe out in the field, my imagination, what I can sort of conjure up, and then logic. If I'm going to put, this type of landscape, what kind of trees would be there? And if I put this type of cloud, what type of atmosphere would be in the painting? So it's really, for me, it's really rewarding painting imaginary landscapes, but based on, years and years of observations and plein air paintings that I've done. And it gives me great freedom because I can paint whatever I want. If I feel like painting, there's a painting in the show that I have a ranch, and there's a pool in the foreground, and there's a little building with a steel roof. And last year I did painting similar to that. This year I changed it all around, but neither painting was based on anything I saw specifically. They're both imaginary, but there's a mountain in the background that kind of looks like this mountain I saw in Colorado, Sleeping Giant it's called. And I spent a week painting that mountain from all different sides. There's the painting. Yeah. So I can incorporate Sleeping Giant into the painting and then make up the foreground. But the landscape in the foreground is typical of what was surrounding sleeping giant mountain.
Wow.
So it really gives me great opportunity to invent compositions and, sort of express my feeling, what I feel about the West.
Wow.
And it's not a little depiction, but sometimes sort of something more poetic and imaginative is more truthful than a literal depiction would be. And I also try to minimize my impact on the scene. I know there's some obviously do wonderful paintings where there's a lot of brushwork and energy and such. And with my paintings, I want to sort of disappear and let the viewer put themselves in the painting, because it's not about me. Like if you see a Van Gogh painting, right away you say Van Gogh, and it's really about Van Gogh. But with me, I want it to be about the scene and creating that sense of grandeur and space and beauty and harmony that you find in the West.
Okay, so this is a question then, maybe a little esoteric, but I know you worked with your father, who was a sign painter, right? And in
murals, a lot of murals in restaurants and public buildings, signs, marbleizing, gold leafing. He did everything. He had 5 kids to support, so he never turned down a job. And I worked when I was a kid, and we had some just crazy jobs.
Really? And so I'm kind of wondering, like, I guess what's coming to mind for me is that, how you came into art and then where things have gone from, eschewing photography and then, work that is what you're out on location and is what you're seeing. And then now to these pieces, and was kicking this conversation off with the myth of the West. It almost seems like now you're maybe more of a Western painter than a East Coast painter with this philosophy.
Well, yes, and I've been doing a lot of Western paintings. There's a couple of other shows that I do, and it's probably about almost half of my output now.
Wow.
And it's like, just a kid discovering a new toy or something like that. There's just so much to explore out there.
Yeah.
And, so many different effects, and you have these monumental mountains, and you can do so much with lighting and atmosphere. So it's really a wonderful location to really explore and to push my boundaries, I guess. And I think it's good to move around a little bit too, rather than doing the same thing, year after year. And it helps my, East Coast paintings too. I think they both sort of inform each other. And here's an example of a painting that I.
So with these works, and every time you send a painting out to the show with water in it, I always do think of the East Coast and maybe kind of that tie-in, because I think there's so much character to water, and having grown up on the water as you did, and you're still out all the time, right? Sailing, and that's a big part of who you are in your work, right?
Yes, I have to have a connection to what I'm painting, like a really deep emotional connection. And I've been painting water since I was a kid, and it's just such a fascinating subject. There are so many different aspects of it. It's transparent, but it's also reflective. It's malleable. You can splash it, but it's also very heavy. It can be shallow. It can be deep. It can be smooth. It can be rough. You've got the sun on it, but you can't really touch that sun reflection. Though it's there, it's kind of not there. There are just so many elusive qualities to water that I find it like really fascinating. So when I can incorporate into an Eastern scene or Western scene, I really like doing that. Yeah.
I remember talking to landscape painter Len Schmiel about the water, and how, what he was saying about it is that you really have to understand how it moves if you're going to paint it, how it eddies and swirls around and turns back on itself. And, to really capture water right. I mean, it's not just a few dashes of paint. You really have to know water, I think.
Right, and you can't paint it from a photograph, because like often I'll see these wave paintings, a crashing wave, and every tiny droplet is painted perfectly and so carefully, but it looks like that wave is never going to break. It's just
Yeah.
like sort of frozen. But then you look at Winslow Homer, whose waves were they weren't, quote, realistic at all. They were much more suggestive. And when you look at his paintings, you can feel the power of that wave crashing into the rocks, and you can almost hear it. And so it's understanding your subject and, all that it entails rather than just copying what you see. And I think that's one of the mistakes a lot of artists who paint from photographs do, is they copy what they see, but they don't really feel the subject. And for me, art is about emotion and feeling things, and then that sort of comes out through your paintbrush. But the first thing I have to do is feel. I have to have a connection to the subject that I'm painting.
Mhm. Would you talk about this painting that I have pulled up here? Because everyone who walks into the gallery, they are just pulled to this painting. And it, and I think to me, it's one of those paintings that feels like you really had fun with it, like you really exaggerated this for the effect in a way, but in this just really, maybe you didn't, but in this wonderful way that just feels, and here are these two adventurers right here. And it's just such a remarkable painting. I'm wondering if you would talk about this, the inspiration, or just talk about it.
Sure. This was a fun painting. Actually, the rock in the middle was painted from a sketch I did of Sentinel Rock in Yosemite.
Oh.
And then that sort of became the focus, but then I changed. Everything else is made up and imaginary. And I envisioned the sun just out of the view to the left, casting a shadow down the left side of the painting and then illuminating the right side. And then when I was in Yosemite painting, we had snow, and in the afternoons, the wind would blow the snow off the top of the mountain. So I said, oh, I'm going to add that, even though it wasn't in the original sketch. But I had seen it. And there again, that's the value of being out there and experiencing nature and your subject matter.
Yeah.
And then I added the two little skiers in the foreground, just to give it a sense of scale and a little bit of interest.
Yeah.
And I'm a skier, so it was kind of fun putting them in.
Wow.
But this is an example, a really pretty clear example of the way I work. I'll have this little kernel of inspiration, and then I'll work on that and expand it and make it into a painting that sometimes has more truth than a literal depiction of the scene would have.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, I mean, it feels like a place you would want to ski off to, or maybe get a helicopter ride home from, I think. And I just want to pull up this other one here too. All these paintings in the show are just so gorgeous. But just to pull this up, Summer Showers, and really how, in this painting, and then the other one that has that really the soft dusty approach to it, that I really like how these kind of become rather lyrical in a sense, and moody,
Right. And this one was completely made up, but I had spent a week painting in this valley near Jackson Hole.
Oh.
And it never rained all week when I was there, but I just had this idea to paint a very soft, subtle painting, and I thought I could make this sort of drizzle. And it's hard to see in the photograph, but when you see the real painting, I used a glaze, which is a thin paint that's sort of translucent, and I brushed it in a diagonal manner across the painting that gives the impression of falling rain.
Wow.
And then I thought I needed a little punch, so I put the little slicker on the cowboys. He's watching the herd of cows.
Yeah. Wow. Okay, Joe, I'm gonna, let me pause the screen share, and don't go anywhere. I'm gonna pull up Silas here, who is in a tin building that is snow is wafting in. And where are you?
So this is the future studio. It's a grain bin that we're repurposing. We've just got the framing for the walls in, and there is a hole in the top, so it is actively snowing into it right now.
My goodness.
But it's about 20 degrees in here.
Yeah, it looks like a meat locker in there, actually. It really does. Are you actually painting in there right now? I mean, these days?
No, I'm not here right now, but my temporary studio is about a half hour away, where I'm currently working.
Yeah.
But I figured I had a painting of our daughter in our house, so I figured I should bring at least one painting out here for the video.
Nice. Oh, very nice. How long is it going to take before that studio is ready?
Well, we're actually moving along pretty good now. We're gonna get it insulated, and then it's just a matter of figuring out how to curve the sheetrock. So if that goes, have it planned, we should be done by the end of the month of January. So.
Wow. Wow. Yeah, good luck with that curving sheetrock. I hear that's just give it a shove, right? Bow it in there. Yeah. So Silas is new. You are new to the show. I don't know if I told you this or not, but Kwang Ho and his wife Adrian came over this summer for dinner, and they were so excited. They're like, "Oh my God, we discovered this new artist," and they were showing me pictures of your work, and they bought something, and I was like, "Wow, that's really good." And so I told them I was going to talk to you and see about inviting you to the show and take full credit for it. So great, go right ahead.
I was real honored. They sent me a message after they bought the painting in Park City, and it was fun to get to have sort of that digital meeting with them at least, and
Yeah.
grateful for the movement from there.
Yeah, and I always tell people, because they say, how do you find artists? So in all seriousness, other artists in the show are my top way that I find new artists for the show, because you guys are always out there talking to each other and whatever. So yeah, so that was a really great find, and love when your work showed up. It's just fantastic. And so I'm going to do a screen share, and not because your whole studio setup is making me feel really cold, because that's not. Hey, so I'm going to pull up. Let me see. I'm going to pull up Final Bow, and I'd love for you to talk about this work. And what I really would, let me just say this. This is what captured me in the work. And when we look at Ulrich's work as well, so to have your work come right on the heels of Joe McGurl's work, which again, just like Joe said, you don't see Joe in this work, and you just barely see the brushwork in there. This is really very quiet, but then that allows the story to kind of pull you into it in a different way. Your work is very much I mean, I would throw you in the category of fauvists and these colorists, and the brushwork that you're using is just so exciting and distinct. And so a few questions that I have, and why don't we just start with subject matter, and I'm kind of going to guess that a lot like Joe, you are pushing things and you are kind of making up aspects of it to create this scene, or not. What's happening here? Yeah,
so I actually resonate a lot with a lot of the things that Joe was talking about. Especially a scene like this where you get like 30 seconds of this image. If I'm out plein air painting, I'm not gonna be able to even come close to accomplishing something like this. And so it really becomes an attempt to recreate something that's essentially a memory. And there's a quote from it's a kind of a strange book. It's called Out of the Silent Planet, but there's this dialogue and back and forth where they talk about a pleasure is never fully realized until it's remembered. And so that's kind of something that I think about a lot when I'm painting, is that I'm seeking to evoke a memory, you know, in the viewer. And it's the shared memory, something that is part of me, it's part of them. And the brush strokes, you know, those thick, heavy brush strokes are actually a part of that. There's a lot of this movement that I feel gets created in that you don't necessarily get in a photograph that you can achieve in painting.
You know, I like, say that again. A memory is, say that again.
Yeah, so a pleasure is never fully realized until it's a memory, until it's remembered.
That's really wonderful. Yeah, and that actually just makes complete sense when you say it.
And so that's a large portion of what, you know, and this painting especially is it's this seeking, it's a grove essentially of dead trees, just after fall and before winter, in this time of year that's you know, it's just almost waiting for it to go away, but remembering that in this, you know, close-up view of such a moment like that, there's actually a lot of beauty and memory that can be found in something like that.
You know, and I think that's exactly it. Like this scene, if you were to walk upon this scene, it would last for maybe 5 minutes, maybe, right? The intensity of that light hitting it as it's going down and away, especially when you live surrounded by mountainous areas, right? It's pretty rare.
Yeah, and this, another thing about this scene is it's essentially a microscopic version of the West. You know, the West is so grand, and sometimes for me, I just have to pull it in and figure out how to just take in a piece of it.
Yeah. You know what, let me pull up, I want to pull up this other one, Golden Swan. Is that coming up? Yeah. And this is a 20 by 20, it's a square painting. And this is another one that I just so enjoyed. You know, I loved opening your work and being able to see it in person. And for Uli and Joe, I'd seen their work in person quite a bit before I was able to get them into the Coors show. So you know, so it was really great to get these and just see how juicy the canvases were, you know, with the layering of paint and the colors and all that. And this one does not let anybody down for sure.
Oh, thanks. I really appreciate that. This is just off the Snake River and kind of near the Idaho-Wyoming border. And it's kind of where I try to find that edge of, it is a real place and it's a real moment that happened, but figuring out how to depict that realness. You know, if I just want to depict the realness, I'm better off just taking the camera, which is a beautiful thing. But figuring out how to really truly convey the excitement and this painting came right on the heels of the last one. Actually painted it. It was the next canvas on the easel. And it was trying to figure out how to carry over the embers from that last painting to that, just that intimacy that a moment of light can bring.
You know, this one also feels like, and I don't know you like you know, I've had time to talk to Joe and Uli over the years, but this one feels possibly like what you were talking about as a kid and exploring. And I mean, it has that kind of almost a dreamlike quality to it of exploration as well.
Yeah, and you know, there's a little bluff that I'm up on that you can look over the Snake River, and I've camped at this spot several times, and in the freezing cold and in the burning hot, and I think there is a lot of truth to what you said. There's just some of that experience and some of the life behind the artist that just ends up making its way into the painting one way or the other.
Yeah. So now that you have a daughter.
I do, yes.
Yeah, and so do you make her go out and sleep out in the cold and all that with you? Is she getting into this with you?
Well, we might start with some warm nights first, just so to not poison it all the way. But so she's 4 years old right now, so we're looking at starting to get into some overnight backpacking. My wife and I did it a lot before she was born, and something that we certainly want to inspire her with. And I grew up, my dad took myself and me and my brother backpacking every year for 5-6 nights at a time, and it's really part of, I think, what has made me into who I am. So I want to be able to do the same for her.
Yeah. Do you find that you see the landscape differently with her, or now that she's part of your life in this way?
Yeah, there's nothing like seeing almost anything, whether it's the landscape or a bug crawling across the sidewalk. Nothing's really seen until you see it through the eyes of a 4-year-old. It's a really beautiful thing.
Yeah, it certainly is, isn't it? Yeah, so these paintings are gorgeous. And here's another one, this 12 by 12 slipping away with the juicy color and exaggerated colors. So I'm wondering if you would talk a little bit about that, how you developed this and your sense of color. Where does this come from?
Yeah, so the exaggerated color, I got to spending a lot of time just looking at my images, and it's so my images of photographs when I'm out not painting, when I'm out just photographing, and we live in such a strange day where I can then bring that image back and blow it up to where a pixel is the size of my head, and really just realizing that, especially there at the edge of light and shadow, that there is an immense amount of vibrant color. And so really just from that, essentially a science experiment of looking at the pixels on a screen, extrapolating and applying that exaggerated color to paintings, because in a way it's not exaggerated color. Now, obviously, for an entire plane of purple snow to be that purple, that means you probably should be looking for shelter somewhere.
Yeah, you've had one too many mushrooms, maybe.
Right. Yeah. But to circle back to that, the idea of it being a memory, there's something about the violet snow that evokes something in the viewer, and at least in me, that just a gray slightly shifted towards blue shadow in the snow doesn't always have that same, like the other winter painting that I have. It's a lot more true to color, but that purple is not untrue. It's just exact.
Right. And no, and I think that's the perfect way in that quote about, a memory, I think that is really, isn't that the edge of where something goes from being a representation to, a work of art? And Joe, in the same thing, taking that emotion or what you're trying to express about the West or a place or a time, that's what kind of changes it from a well-crafted thing to actually a piece of art, right?
Yeah, I think so.
So talk about this one here, and then I'm going to pull Ulrich up. I have no idea. What time is it even there, Uli?
4 a.m.
Yeah, okay. So I probably should have made you go first so you could go back to bed.
No, I was already up all night, so it doesn't matter anymore.
Oh, you haven't gone to bed yet, right? Yeah, talk about this one, and then let me get over to Uli before he starts snoring. And
yeah, this is from a painting trip down near St. George, Utah, and a really fun trip just because of how different the landscape is. And that's something that's so bizarre about the West, is what you call the North, and then the West, and then the Southwest. There's just such extreme diversity of the grandeur of the West. And so it's the water there is flowing into the Virgin River. And you really don't get a grasp of how large that cliff is until you really realize that that's a fairly wide river at the base there. And it's another, these smaller pieces that are done on location. A lot of the times I don't ever even send them out. I just keep them sort of for myself. That's maybe a little bit selfish, but there's so much more connection that I have in a small piece that I camped and, woke up sort of wondering if I had sand fleas from the side of the river there. And there's just so much that goes into a painting like that, that, translate to being inches tall.
Okay. Speaking of sand fleas.
It's a good translation.
Yeah, what a great segue. Hey, Ulrich.
Hi.
Hi.
Hi, Rose.
So, okay, here's the segue is that sometimes you will get Ulrich Gleiter paintings that have bugs in them and rocks and grass and because you paint, pretty much you paint everything out on location, right?
Yes, really, I would always start on location at least and have many sessions outside. Then, of course, there's always this period where sometimes the painting can just sit in the studio for weeks and you're just maybe, or like you don't want to see it for a few weeks, and then you're just making some additions and even pull up maybe some photographs that you did when you were painting it, or just something that you feel that has to be done, pull stuff together. So I always want to put them away after I painted them. Let's like half a year later I always hate to like shoot them out to a show or a gallery or something right away after I painted. I never really like that.
Yeah.
So always.
Well, that's good to know.
So
Okay. So Joe comes from this background with his father and the muralist, and and bringing that East Coast and coming out West with his aesthetic. Silas grew up in the West and camping and really great memories of being with his father and all that kind of stuff, and the rugged aspect of it. You come at these paintings as a German artist who trained very traditionally in the Russian school, right?
Yeah, it was an exchange, student exchange. And after that, still when I was studying in Dresden at the academy, up until in the undergraduate years. And it was just this really classical school, where you were painting portraits all the time for every like drawing, painting, what just really was fascinating me. And then I decided to really make good use of that time, like of the years of study. This is what I really need. And eventually then I relocated to Russia, right? For studying. Yeah.
So you're bringing a completely different aesthetic, and it's one that's not unknown to us in the West. Feshin is a really famous Nikolai Feshin artist who relocated to Taos and brings that kind of Russian sensibility to the work.
Actually, Feshin studied in the same studio as I did in
the
Academy in St. Petersburg.
There you go. Now you are an unofficial Westerner because of that connection. I'm wondering, and I'm going to pull up your work too, Uli, because I'm wondering if you would talk about these pieces and I think with your work, to me, maybe what we're really talking about here is this aesthetic with the work. And there are a lot of similarities with your work and Silas's work in the way the paint is laid down. But then things really kind of change in my mind, and the way that you're interpreting these scenes, and this one here in particular is one that as soon as we hung this and people started walking in, they're like, wow, wow. You know, I mean, I think this has happened with all three of you, that people have walked up and they just stand there, it kind of to the point where then they start looking around and they're like, Rose, what is happening to me right now? And this is one of those paintings, Ulrich, and I'm wondering if you would talk about this piece in particular.
Well, I can relate to many things that Joe and Silas were saying, and you really need this connection to the spot, to the thing that you're painting, to the spot that you're painting. And I always, when I'm out landscape paintings, I usually like to make trips of at least 2-3 weeks, just, you know, that you begin to feel the area where you are, that you begin to feel it going on walks, and just to see it, you know, just not to paint what they call postcards, but to paint paintings.
Yeah.
And so I mean, of course, now with this particular one, when you're painting snow, and this was December in northern Finland, and actually this was, it was so far north that you've only, you know, it is north of the Arctic Circle. So this is actually like midday. It was just like an hour after that, it was already dark, and an hour ahead of this, it was dark too, because there's no sun anymore. It is just, this twilight is the most sunlight that you would ever get. So you have to be really fast. That's what I want to say. And of course, there's a lot of things in that kind of painting that happen just by chance, because, you know, like the snow was just hitting really hard, and I just after like painting for an hour, like the whole palette was covered in snow, and it's just like you're really fighting with the elements, and at the same time it's getting dark. And but of course, like, I mean, then you're taking it home, you're taking a look at it, and like the snow is melting off, and then you're taking a look at it. What have I actually done? And you keep go painting, and you really want to be close to the thing that you are creating, because often, like, the most interesting paintings, they're not, you're actually seeing them while you're painting. I feel like that, like, especially so, like, when you have got winter, there's always this moment, you know, like when the sky is darker than the ground, or then like the ground is, like, the snow is then darker, is lighter than the sky. It's just this moment just before night. It can be just the most beautiful moment, but you really but you have to be close to your subject. You need to feel it, you need to see it. And maybe you're just like you're just deciding, oh, I actually need to paint it right over all again, just to create really something which is, a piece of art, what you want to get.
So that seems to be really a common theme, is that you really need to know this. You need to experience this landscape, or whatever that thing is. And, you know, I think even for Joe, when we're talking about being out on the water, you're out on the water all the time, right? In the summer.
Yeah, out in the snow.
You're out in the snow, and Silas is out, and so it's kind of more than just plunking down your Pashad box, or your, you know, whatever you're working on, right? You actually know this very well, yes?
And yeah, this one here, I mean, that was also maybe like a 6 weeks trip. It was the first painting that I started, and it was the last painting that I finished, because I was always going back to it, and I wasn't I wasn't happy the way it looked, like felt something was missing, and then snow is melting, snow is falling onto it again, and you're just really composing, you know, some image. You're instilling an image of the scene that is there, and especially like with winter, because just the things are so rough, you won't. And just like at this twilight, you know, which is just like everything happens within 20 minutes. You need, you just will never get it down onto the canvas just in this little sort of time. You want to go back there. You want to really finish something that catches you.
You know, I'm going to pull up there's cacti, and then there's another one that inspired from a trip west, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So, and they're this really kind of interesting juxtaposition against these northern landscapes, and you know, and I wonder if you kind of talk about, does your brain have to switch over to dealing with different atmosphere or different scenes, or is it, do you process it in the same way?
Well, you would process it in a similar way, but of course, what you're feeling when you're painting heat and desert things, it's of course much different than when you're painting snow. Of course, you're in a very different mood. But I mean, the basics of painting are of course similar. You know, you have got this, you have got this dark and light, and we don't want to talk about that, but
Yeah, and here's
yeah, but of course, with sun, painting is much quicker than with the previous ones. You know, at this twilight, of course, there you can, I usually paint them much longer because it is much harder. It is harder to get color into it, just because everything is always mixed with this grayish things. And here you have got blues, you have got violets, you have got yellows, and it is all there, and you have to choose. You have to choose which ones you're taking. Whereas when you are painting this moody winter landscapes, you're pulling the color out of the subject that you're having and trying to emphasize it. Whereas here, when you're painting sun, you're more like muting it.
Yeah. Do you have a preference?
I love painting sun. I love painting sun.
Yeah.
And especially, of course, right now, I don't have got, because we're here a landscape, Western show, of course, I don't have any cityscapes or things like this with me. But when I'm painting, say, like European cities, like in France or something, or in Spain, or even like in Germany, painting city center of Berlin or things like this, I just adore when there's sun, just because it always gives already a story, how just like that play of light is on the buildings. And yeah, like that with architecture, I can hardly paint without having sun in the paintings. But yeah, of course, sun is much preferable often. It's much more, you have to be fast, you have to be quick, and you can choose. That's really nice.
So we are getting right up to the top of the hour. And I would just like to encourage anyone who has any comments or questions for our artists tonight to go ahead and throw them in the chat box. But this is the point when I love to open it up to the three artists, and I like to kind of get out of the way. And if you have any comments or thoughts or anything that you want to toss out there, please feel free right now. Silas is wishing he had a space heater, I can tell, but yeah, go ahead, guys.
I'd just like to say how great it was being on this Zoom with Silas and Ulrich, because we have such different styles. But when I teach workshops, I always say that this is the way I do it, but there are a lot of ways to paint, and they're all legitimate and they're all beautiful if they're beautifully executed. And for instance, I love Van Gogh and I love Frederick Church, who were, painted completely oppositely. They were contemporaries, but they painted in completely different ways. And like when you look at Ulrich's snow scene, it's like you want to just say it's cold. He gets that sense of cold. The first one with the trees, you look at it and you're almost shivering because he caught that sense of cold, that emotion. And then Silas is the first painting with the tree and the bright orange was almost like an explosion, like a bomb of just power and energy. So I love looking at different approaches because we all look at art differently. And I always say to my workshop students that, if we all painted the same, it would be a really boring art world. So it's great to see different approaches to like the landscape. And especially when they're beautifully done, like Silas and Ulrich's with that power and the energy and just you can feel the brushstroke. And yeah, so it's great seeing your work, guys. It's nice to see Silas's. I haven't seen his work before, but I've seen Ulrich obviously at the previous course shows.
Yeah. Guys, anything else in there?
Yeah, I would say essentially the same thing. It's really, we talk about the West and how much it's changed, and so so now here we are, we're having a video conference from Europe and the East Coast in Colorado, and I'm honored. I'm grateful for the time I get to live, that I get to paint the West, and I get to be on a video call with these guys and to be in the Coors show. It's overwhelming, and I'm grateful.
Uli, any last words?
Well, I can just relate to many things that both of you said, and yeah, just really looking forward to seeing all the paintings and Silas and Joe's paintings already in 4 or 5 days from now on.
Yeah, it's coming right up. I'm just gonna toss this out there, and I think it's something that comes up a lot for me as a curator, is looking for authenticity and looking for people who are being honest and with the work, and that's a lot of different things. You've all touched on those things in what you've said tonight, and I think these calls, I'm just so grateful that you guys are all game for hopping on these calls and talking about the work, because I think it's the thing. I get to have these conversations with you individually. And so for me, I'm just really grateful that you're willing to talk about this. And because at the end of the day, it's hard work, right? It's hard work. It doesn't always work out. It doesn't always sell. And there's a lot of big question marks to making this life work. But I think the three of you are great examples of how to live an authentic life and how to create authentic work. If it's like Joe, completely made up at this point, that it's based in this sensibility or emotion or something you want to convey, and based on things. Ulrich is standing out there in the snow I'm cold thinking about that, and Silas actually in the cold in a barn. I just want to say I'm grateful for you. I'm grateful for all of our artists, and you're my final three. So we're going out with a bang. I really appreciate you all very much. Any last words and any questions? I want to thank everybody who's been on this call listening in, and it will be downloaded and put up online. If you want to share it with anybody, that should be in the next couple of days too. So final words and thank you all. Anybody?
Just thank you for listening, folks out there in Zoom land. And it was great to talk with you, Rose and Ulrich and Silas. I enjoyed it very much. Thanks.
All right, guys. Ulrich, back to bed. And Monica Fairchild, thank you. Very interesting. Thank you, Monica. Take care, everybody. Happy New Year. We will hopefully see most of you in a few days. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.